Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first panel of the year for Do the Work. Um, for the sake of the topic of this conversation, I think it's important to say that it is January 22nd at around 4 p.m. Pacific time at the time of this recording. The world is moving very quickly right now, so it's important to state the time and date. My name is Arya Davachi. I'm very happy to be having this conversation and for you to be joining us. I am the programming director at Do the Work. If you're unfamiliar with Do the Work, or if this is your first time joining us, Do the Work is a grassroots organization that is aimed at creating meaningful and sustainable change for queer people in marketing and advertising. We are an organization that's been around for quite some time, not decades, but enough time where we are starting to feel really the fruits of our labor. And we have been having conversations like the one we're about to have for around 4 years now. And today's conversation is going to be heavy. So I do want to preface this with the trigger warning, general sort of preparedness, pull you up by your bootstraps to strap in generally for this conversation. As I said, I'm the programming director. That's my gay job. My day job is I'm an experiential producer, and I also manage a team of folks that are doing incredible work for Airbnb right now, trying to create experiences that bring people together in the real world to create community and to create lived experiences that change people's lives. Before we jump into any sort of topic, before we even broach why we're here, I want to let our incredible panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to come to you, Jenn Grace, first. Please tell folks where you are, what you do, how you identify, please.
Perfect. My name is Jenn Grace. I am calling in from Hartford, Connecticut. I identify as queer. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a book publisher of nonfiction books. And most of the authors that we work with are somehow impacted by today's conversation.
Fantastic. Welcome to Do the Work. Diego, I'm going to come to you second. Please introduce yourself. Where are you? How do you identify? What do you do?
Hey, I'm Diego Andrade. I'm the SVP Executive Creative Director at Orci, a multicultural advertising agency. I'm in Whittier, California. It's LA for those who don't know the LA areas. And yeah, my day job kind of is my gay job because I do marketing for queer consumers in my capacity as an ECD currently. And I identify as queer. I'm queer. I'm a first gen Mexican. Technically, I'm an immigrant. I'm not first gen, but I'm culturally first gen because I grew up here. It's kind of a complex thing. And yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
Fantastic. What a blessing to have your gay job and your day job be the same thing. What an amazing opportunity. Last but certainly not least, Jennifer Brown, can you please introduce yourself, where you are, what you do, how you identify, please?
Absolutely. Jenn Brown, she, her pronouns, the beautiful Hudson Valley of New York. And I have had a DEI consultancy for over 20 years before people knew about the E, the I, the A, the B, let alone the D. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but lots of development and good times and hard times. And I'm LGBTQ plus myself. I have a partner of 28 years. Yay. It's good. It's good. Yeah, I'm just rolling with the punches over here with this moment. But it's honestly, I've been on the front lines watching the battles and experiencing the effects of those battles in my business for, I would say, a year and a half now. I remember the moment. So we can talk more about that and why I have some. This is not a shock to me necessarily because I've been seeing this and feeling it for quite a while.
Well, welcome everyone to Do the Work. The topic of our conversation today is the effects, the realities of what the second Trump administration, which began a little over 48 hours ago, means for queer people in marketing, advertising, and beyond. I want to set the scene by laying out some facts of what the first administration was like, what the Biden administration was like, what this Trump campaign was like, and then what has happened in the last 48 some hours. So please strap in while I just like bombard you with information. So some key elements of the first Trump administration. The first Trump administration submitted amicus briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court supporting discrimination against LGBTQ people. Trump's Department of Justice upended previous DOJ interpretations of the Civil Rights Act that protected transgender and non-binary workers from employment discrimination and ceased enforcing non-discrimination protections, as well as taking a hostile stance to LGBTQ workers in court. The HHS created a new office whose sole purpose would be to defend physicians and other medical professionals who decided to refuse care, including to LGBTQ patients. And of course, they banned transgender service members from the military. The Biden administration, during its 4 years, did instate the Respect for Marriage Act, which repealed the Defense of Marriage Act, and required the U.S. federal government and all U.S. states and territories to recognize the validity of same-sex and interracial civil marriages in the United States and protected religious liberty. The Biden administration advanced a federal blood donation policy based on science, not stigma, which is a very fancy way of saying that gay men are now allowed to give blood and donate blood. For those who are unaware, that was not something that was technically allowed prior to the Biden administration since the mid-90s. And then finally, the Biden administration announced expansive new protections for gay and transgender medical patients, prohibiting federally funded health providers and insurers from discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. That was actually a reversal of a policy instituted by the Trump administration and helped to fulfill part of President Biden's vow to restore civil rights protections for LGBTQ people that he spoke about during his campaign. Of course, during the Trump campaign, there was a great deal of anti-DE&I rhetoric. That term of phrase was actually weaponized by the Trump campaign. There was a lot of anti-trans campaigning as well. There was the, I guess now somewhat infamous Kamala is for they, them, Trump is for you campaign that ran, to me, seemingly every weekend during every football game, every basketball game, every baseball game that I was watching during those seasons leading up to the election. And then, of course, the anti-immigration stance during the campaign. Many will remember they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. And that was just during the campaign. I now want to turn to what has happened during the last 48 hours. During the last 48 hours, the Trump administration has signed, President Trump, I should say, has signed a sequence of executive orders that have given the executive branch departments and agencies 60 days to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, including all chief diversity officer jobs, equity action plans, and environmental justice positions. They're requiring departments and agencies to give the White House Office of Management and Budget an accounting of previous DEI efforts, including names of relevant DEI contractors and DEI grant recipients. They are putting all DEI officers on immediate leave. Those people will be losing their jobs in the coming days. They are repealing several Biden-era directives on racial and ethnic equity and LGBTQ rights. This includes orders intending to ensure equitable distribution of federal money based on the 2020 census, which is preventing government discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation, and specifically encouraging inclusion in school settings. White House educational initiatives for Native Americans, Hispanic, and Black Americans, and an order expressly allowing transgender persons to serve in the military. They are now requiring that the U.S. government recognize only two genders, male and female, on passports, visas, global entry cards, and all other forms and documents. There is a mandate that all federal civil rights law and labor law be interpreted and enforced with the understanding that the word, quote, sex is not a synonym for and does not include the concept of gender identity. They have dissolved the White House Gender Policy Council and have repealed the Department of Education's guidelines on Title IX concerning transgender rights and various documents advising schools on how to support and protect LGBTQ persons. And they have forbid federal money, including grants, from being used to, quote, promote gender ideology and direct the Attorney General and Homeland Security to ensure that males are not detained in women's prisons or housed in women's detention centers. They also have banned the LGBTQ pride flag from being flown at federal buildings and U.S. embassies. It is day 3 of the second Trump administration. I want to start by asking each of you how you are. how you are doing, how you were taking this on. And I want to start with you, Jennifer, because you said you're not surprised. So while I let all this information wash over Jenn and Diego, I want to come to you first. How are you feeling?
So thank you for going through all that. I mean, it's horrifying, but really important to know. All of my, buddies on a media cleanse right now and avoiding. I think it's really important to know the moves that they're making right now. And I'm just thinking through, obviously I deal not with federal agencies as clients. I mainly support employers, non-federal agencies, private employers, multinational companies, et cetera. And I'm just kind of watching. I just don't know how far this is going to go. Whether it's going to move then into the world of non-federal agency employers, and what sorts of muscle they will have to strip out and require the disillusion. We've seen, the Walmarts, et cetera, but could it apply to all companies, and could that actually happen, and what would actually happen, as a backlash to that by the employers? So they're pressure testing the system, and they're sending out the trial balloons, and they're seeing, how many bowling pins they can push over, and see how easy that is to do. And it's super disturbing to see that Robbie Starbuck, as their emissary, has been successful in all these. But anyway, it's the feeling of it is total heartbreak, obviously, for all of those employees and leaders that we know personally inside these organizations, having done really amazing work, and heartbreak for future generations that are going to suffer in terms of their opportunity, because there's no watchdogs in the organizations, making sure that pipelines are different tomorrow than they are today, making sure that the company's demographics match the demographics of the world that they do business in. But right now it feels like, as a practitioner, that so much of what we've taught is so logical, but there's also all these arguments being made that it's illogical. So it's very strange as a practitioner with a consulting set of skills and assumptions and structures that we've always kind of created change through. If those are being eviscerated and made illegal, I think I'm sitting with, how do I create change if there's no mechanisms for change anymore? And as a change maker, and an advocate and an activist, that's a really weird feeling. I have to say, I don't know what sorts of professions have gone through this exact thing of, I don't know what's like it. It's sort of like you lose all your tools, your mechanisms, your channels, your ability to, pull the levers of change and understand that, like, the old accountability that used to exist, the CEI, the Corporate Equality Index, used to hold companies accountable, and they used to compete to get a good score on that. And it used to push HRC to elevate the criteria and keep adding new criteria so that they could get their 100%. And now we have the exact opposite. So it's just really bizarre to get your head around. And I only hope that there's a level of disorganization in how all of this is rolled out, that will give people a chance to think about how to counter it. But it also feels so pervasive that there's like nowhere to hide. And I just want to read something that chilled me today in a new way. The Department of Homeland Security said in an internal memo, "We are aware of efforts by some in government to disguise these programs by using coded or imprecise language. If you are aware of a change in any contract description or personnel position description since November 5th, 2024, to obscure the connection between the contract and DEIA or similar ideologies, please report all facts and circumstances within 10 days. There will be no adverse consequences for timely reporting this information. However, failure to report this information within 10 days will result in adverse consequences." So I was going to say that companies are still doing the work. They are scrambling to keep doing the work because they know it's the right work to do and they must do it. But with things like that, now we have a situation where it's tell on the people that this is going on. And here's an email address to send to us. And by the way, there are also, I hate to say this, but there are fake employees, fake job candidates interviewing for positions and getting positions for the sole purpose of getting inside companies so that they can make sure that the internal practices are being sent and reported. So, yeah.
That's a really scary thing to say. That's horrifying.
I know.
Yeah.
And I got that right from a friend in a large company who they knew they had a false candidate working his way through the system.
Wow.
And they all knew. And so they conducted themselves in a certain way and were very careful. But so every time I think about being optimistic that we're going to somehow outsmart this, it feels like we're sort of being blocked at every turn. And it's not a great place to be.
Yeah. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
Diego, I'm going to come to you next. Now also we're washing in what Jennifer has said too. How are you feeling?
Sorry.
Yeah. No, like you said, it's very important to be informed and be aware. I think a colleague of mine put it really succinctly and nicely on LinkedIn. I saw it earlier today. Shout out to Kendra Meyer, a fellow creative. They said they're doing worse than some, better than a lot of people, and I'm in a bit of a limbo of I'm not sure how to respond or how to act or feel at the moment because I know they're hitting us with a lot. A lot of it's obfuscation by design. A lot of this stuff, is going to be immediately challenged legally, is going to go through a long court cycle. The birthright citizenship, I think, ban already has 17 states suing for, a stay. And I'm not just queer, I'm Mexican and I'm Latino, and I'm a naturalized citizen. So there's lots of like intersections of anxiety occurring within me in a personal level. And, from a marketer standpoint, I think, part of my responsibility, my job is to know our consumer segments really well, know where they're at, psychographically, what they're feeling, how they're going to respond. And I think there's a lot of consumer segments that I represent in my everyday job, including the Hispanic community, including queer folks that are going to be negatively impacted by a lot of this and where their head's going to be at, what decisions are they going to be making, apart from the human, level of not wanting to see anyone come to harm and being part of, those same communities. It's a bit of a paralyzing feeling of, I want to be aware, I want to know where I can help and I can support, but I also am not sure where to start because there is so much going on.
Yeah, there is a bit of that. I do think that is part of the tactic, right? I do think there's a bit of let's go with this large swath of attack because if we are able to sort of hit at every angle, where would we even start? Because like you had mentioned, I only read the things most prominently focused on LGBTQ folks. I didn't even, that was one section of a wide swath of things. We could spend the whole hour reading. I don't mean to diminish any of the other elements. It is completely overwhelming. And I completely agree that there have been moments where I too have been numb to the idea of like where to even start.
What quiet things are going on while we're paying attention to some of the really loud movements, It's like that's kind of where what we're gonna really see in the coming months and years.
Correct. Finally, Jenn, how are you doing?
Yeah, I feel like I've been sitting here even trying to think how to put it into words. I had a conversation with a couple of queer friends this morning, and it's like you want to be okay, but you're also like not really okay. And I feel like I'm at a loss because I feel like I've been in the kind of advocacy for our community since 2006. So not quite 2 decades, but pretty close to. And all of the time it's like we're making a little progress. Were we only going like maybe centimeter by centimeter? Sure. But we were always kind of like slowly going in a somewhat positive direction. And so to just be, and Jenn, you were saying before, like we saw this coming. Like, this is not like there's something about it that's not a surprise, but then it's also like jarring to your system, like to your emotional system, to think like, oh wow, all of these like incremental things that we've been doing over decades are now just being completely wiped away with the stroke of a pen. And there's something very just scary and horrifying and sad and heartbreaking about all of it. And I'm just trying to figure out how to kind of function business as usual, right? Like, I'm not in the core advocacy work like I was before, but I do support diverse authors in every way that that might mean. And so I am now trying to be kind of the therapist for the people that we support, who are thought leaders, who are on the front lines of these conversations and advocating and doing all the things, and also trying to like have self-care for myself at the same time. So it's a very just very weird kind of floating in like no man's land type of feeling right now.
Yeah. I think that is a place where a lot of us are finding ourselves right now. And I do think that it is something that I share as well, like that incremental push that felt, I think, was potentially starting to feel less of a Sisyphus sort of push, was starting to feel less and less of that, has now felt like just, oh, well, now that's over. Now there's not even a hill anymore. Now we're just yeah. Well, let's get into the weeds a bit. And Jennifer Brown, it's interesting. We were talking last week about, as we prepared for this conversation, I wanted to talk to you about how this would affect DEI in the workplace. What I didn't anticipate was at the inauguration, in the front row would be the CEOs of some of the biggest American companies. And now here we are, we're talking about, and DEI was one of the largest, attacked systems. What are your thoughts around what DEI in the workplace is going to look like, and what is going to be the future of DE&I in the workplace?
Yeah, it's so cynical, that those tech leaders, they're self-interested, and they're showing up and giving money because they don't want a headache from the federal government, right? And they don't want to be regulated, and they don't want their AI dreams to be, blocked. I'm learning a lot about kind of why they were there, honestly, but it hurts. Obviously, it's like such a sellout of the things that they used to support. However they think it looks, or whatever practical choice it might have been, you can't have it always. And they've got people resigning. They've got, a workforce that is probably just so angry, and also being shut down at the same time. And I'm worried we're all really tired too, even in the workforce. I think a lot of employees are tired. I mean, Jen, to your point, I worry when, like, Robbie Starbuck was going around, and I talked to somebody at Tractor Supply and somebody at John Deere, and she said, none of our employees are protesting. Like, none of our ERGs, and none. And I was like, what? Like, what? Why? Like, how could that be true? But this scary, scary thing about the difference of 8 years ago and now, and just that futility piece, we are all sensing that we're just not sure our activism is going to do anything. That is the wearing down. And no matter how much we try to summon up it's risky for us to protest because we get fired. There wouldn't even be room to do that because there's no democratic process in companies. Like, they could fake it before, but now we really know. The question is going to be, for me, I think tech is tech. I think in other industries, I've been giving keynotes at companies, even this year, even a couple of weeks ago, who CEO stands up and says, we are staying the course, and we are doing this, and we understand it's a critical talent differentiator. It's a critical market differentiator. We cannot survive without talking about this, but they are positioning in the work in different places in the organization, and they are naming it differently. And that's why I read you that very chilling thing from that internal memo, because that takes it to a whole other level. Like, we are watching you, and we're watching you bury this and change the name, and we will find you anyway. Like that is
Right.
that. And that is like, wow. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so what does that even mean? What does that mean for employees using their voice, bringing their full selves to work? What does it mean for ERGs? I mean, I'm still getting calls about ERG work. I think there's lots and lots of companies, whether it's media companies, banks, financial services, insurance, that are like fashion, retail. They are doing the work, and so it's going to push is going to come to shove when it comes to companies, and we're going to see if industries move as a block or whether certain ones sort of set the pace and others follow. It may come down to the leader, him or herself, often himself more often, and their sort of intestinal fortitude to battle, and how closely they're going to stick to their values. The Airbnb CEOs, like, by all accounts, an incredible human, and like navigated the pandemic in a completely like conscious way, in a kind way. I would imagine there's going to be some really fascinating battles that happen, and I'm going to get my popcorn. I also work in this business, so I hope to work in this business, but I don't know. This is going to mean the shrinkage, massive shrinkage of our work as a field. And it's especially ironic and cruel because so many people jumped into the work in 2020, like so many, and great people. Like, look, it was uneven. Like, people jumped in because of passion and had no skills and got hired. And, it sort of muddied a lot of things. But the bottom line is that a lot of people felt like they found their purpose in that year and the following year, and found the work that really mattered to them. And that is, to me, a special kind of heartbreak, to discover your joy only to have it be taken away, and not to trust employers anymore to be our advocates, because for many years, I supported them in being our advocates, and I built them up, and I supported their employees. And a lot of us, like, we celebrated them. Like, they sponsored our efforts in the LGBTQ community. They wrote big checks. They went on stage. They promoted their executives. There was a lot of allyship, imperfect, but it was a tremendous feeling to feel that you had such a powerful engine that was supporting your little tiny vulnerable community. And and I think I will miss that, and that may be in our history books at this point, ever feeling that way again.
That's heartbreaking. But I think that it's very hard to disagree with you. And I think that's what's, of course, like, the actual reality is heartbreaking. And then not being able to disagree with you is like another layer of heartbreaking on top of that. And it's interesting you brought up that, the leaders and their ability to stay authentic to their identities and their beliefs are going to be the ones that are going to really be able to make that difference. Which brings me to Jenn. Grace, I want to ask you, how do you feel like this second Trump administration is going to affect people's ability to embrace their actual identities and their voice, right? You are in that work of, empowering people to find their voice, find their identities. Like, there's something that happens when you start to enter into this kind of world where people don't want to do that anymore. Do you feel like we might be shying away from that now?
It's interesting because I feel like Jenn just spoke so eloquently about kind of the employee side of things, whereas my vantage point is much more from the entrepreneurial side of things, because the majority of folks that I support are thought leaders who are running their own, maybe it's one person shop consultancy, or maybe they're a full-time speaker for what they do for a living. And so I feel like I've already been having a lot of conversations. So when the election results came in and we had that first wave of heartbreak, that Friday, I sent an email to all of our authors and I was like, listen, I'm sure there's a lot of emotions happening. I'm going to make the space on Friday for all of us to just have a conversation. And what does this mean? And how does it really kind of impact all of us? And I had probably about 20 folks. We have hundreds of authors, about 20 people showed up. And it was the 20 people who needed to have the space to just talk about what this feels like and how they're going to move forward. In the consensus from that first conversation was kind of like an oh shit moment. Like, we really have to pivot to how we're showing up in the world, whether that is pivoting in the direction of almost watering down our message a little bit or pivoting in the opposite direction of doubling down. And so it has to be one or the other. It's either you're watering down or doubling down is kind of what that outcome was. And so we've been meeting regularly, like once a month, just for the last couple of months. We're meeting again tomorrow. And I have no idea what the conversation tomorrow is going to look like. But what I do know is that there are people who are terrified. There are people who are directly impacted by all of the things that you rattled off at the top of this conversation. And then there are others, because most of us are just exhausted, I think. I think people who are thought leaders are exhausted, especially those who are talking about their lived experience that is somehow being even more marginalized than it's already been. And so I think it's this balance of how do we all just kind of collectively continue to show up because we know the work is important, we have to do the work. And also, how do we really balance that? Wow, maybe we need to like take a step back for a minute, let somebody else lead the charge for a little bit. And so it's this weird dynamic that I think a lot of thought leaders are kind of facing, but I don't know that anyone is saying I'm afraid to tell my story. And again, this is just on the entrepreneurial side of things, because there are minimal repercussions in the grand scheme of things. Like, I own my business, I can do whatever I please. Are there consequences? Sure, but it's not going to be from some overlord who comes down and says, no, you can't do that, and now I'm going to, fire you from your own company. So I think that having to think through how we do show up in spaces and how maybe we should be showing up as a Trojan horse. And there's kind of that sales adage of like, sell them what they want, deliver what they need. I think there probably needs to be more of that from a storytelling standpoint of sell them what they think they want, but really come in under that radar of the Trojan horse and deliver what the people need in those organizations, whether it's the consultancy work that's happening from a DEI standpoint, or whether it's just someone standing on a stage talking about what their lived experience is. It's like we have to find a way almost to camouflage our stories, which is a really just crappy thing to think about, because I've had my own business for 2 decades at this point, and I'm like, I can't even imagine being in the closet. Like, there's not even a remote scenario in my life in which I would ever be in the closet. And so in our mission statement, in our email signature, it says everywhere, queer owned, women led. Like, it is everywhere, because for me, that's a way to weed out people. Because if you have a problem with that, I don't want you ruining our community. And when I say community, I don't even mean just LGBTQ, like our community of authors. Like, that one bad apple will absolutely destroy kind of the harmony that we've created. And so I think when we think about storytelling, I think more of us are going to have to really be even more out. Again, it's either watering down where we're going back into the closet, or we're doubling down and we're like, listen, I'm out whether you like it or not, and I'm going to be in your face, and I have to be almost confrontational in a way to get you to see that I'm not actually a threat. And I feel like that's a lot of the advocacy work that we were doing already. It's just taking like a different shape because we're even more on the defensive than I think we were before. So it's that, I don't know. It's just, I'm a little bit all over the place in my response, but it's just, I feel like it's just such a big topic to unpack.
It is. It's enormous. It's enormous, and it's. I think you answered eloquently, actually, and I think actually you've posited something that I want to sort of throw towards Diego, which is this idea of like, either we shrink or we expand, and that's something I would love from your perspective, Diego, in terms of how the more traditional marketing community is going to respond, like how our work and how we tell queer stories and multicultural stories, and the way that we do that kind of work, either that'll shrink and will become non-existent, if you will, or it'll go the other way. What are your thoughts? How do you feel like telling these queer stories will sort of change in these next 4 years in the advertising space?
Yeah, first off, hell yeah, Jen, being louder if you can be. I was super, super hyped to hear that statement. But I think as far as like advertising and queer storytelling, I think there's a couple contextual things I gotta get into to really answer that. So I think the brands that are already doing it, that are already engaged, I think they have to do it in a different way, right? I think it all becomes about a more integrated inclusivity, more intersectional, if you will, because I think it's very easy for the Robbie Starbucks of the world and those people to like target these big, loud, flashy tentpole pride moments in advertising. But if you make inclusivity and queer representation kind of an endemic part of your brand narrative, it's a lot more difficult to pick that apart and attack that if you're a brand where, you know, queer inclusivity is part of like your super like lower funnel regional work and all that stuff. So it's like, you know, having it be more stratified, more coded into, more woven through is going to make us, you know, harder to extricate in a way. So I think that's one thing about the brands that are already doing it is making it more intersectional, making it, you know, not just about, you know, what consumer segments are identified as explicitly queer, but what about, you know, people who are queer and Latino, people who are queer and Black, people who are queer and Asian American, you know, queer women, you know, trans issues and stuff like that. Like weaving that into your storytelling in an organic way and making it much more stratified and much more built in to your brand narrative, I think is going to be an effective way to combat that kind of inclination to shrink or folks or external pressures to not highlight those stories anymore. And I think for, you know, the work that's to be done in convincing, you know, brands and advertisers in the world to actually engage, I think it's a couple things, right? This administration is positioning a reality that, you know, we're extreme, we're fringe, we're on the outside of society, as if queer consumers weren't people that, you know, were just living their lives, that have a favorite fast food joint, have a gas station they drive a little further to get to, have a favorite grocery store. We're all just, you know, consumers participating in this same economy. So I think, you know, that reality is something we have to communicate. And a part of our responsibility, our ethical responsibility as advertisers, is to reflect that reality that, you know, these are people, these are consumer segment like any other. We have to respect them. We have to know who they are and represent them authentically. So I think that's a big thing for me. And I think also it's the reality, right? We are reflecting the reality of consumers back at them in our marketing. And the reality is that there are more of us. I think generationally, Gen Z is what? More than 1 in 5 of Gen Z are queer. That's up from like 10% of millennials. So that's going to happen. They're going to age up into your, you know, main buying demographic. And, you know, not just the 1 in 5 in that demographic, but everyone who loves them, everyone who knows them, everyone who appreciates when a brand advocates for them or includes them. That's a larger network of people than people I think are really realizing. And, you know, I think as generational notwithstanding, the business, you know, proposition is that queer people in this country have $1.4 trillion in spending power. So if, you know, if you're not getting heard on the ethical and the moral storytelling narrative that you want about why it's important to participate and represent and include this vast, diverse consumer segment, it's also future-proofing your business. You know, your youth demographic is going to age up, and then, you know, the spending power isn't going to go anywhere. That's approaching the spending power of Latinos in this country, which we all know is monumental. So I think there's a lot of things going into it, but the number one thing is there is no reason for us to shrink back from a business perspective and from a moral and ethical perspective. I think we have to keep telling these stories.
Fuck yeah. That's
Yeah.
thank you for that. We needed that. We really needed that today. That's really well said. That's really well said. It's a really good segue because I think like it's so easy, and I think particularly for me, to full transparency, it's really easy for me to sometimes feel very isolated in this. Like I operate in a very, my family is incredibly cis, straight, very easy to feel isolated. And the first Trump administration was not a good time for me. I have a lot of Republican family. My chosen family is obviously not that. But you know, I'm wondering for each of you, what do you do to take care of yourselves in this time, in this place? What worked for you during the first administration that maybe you're going to bring back in this during this time? What do you recommend everybody do to take care of themselves? Uh, not as thought leaders, but as humans, queer humans. That's what I want to know. Um, Jennifer Brown,
Hmm.
do you have anything that works for you personally? It's not going to be universal. I'm not asking for universal stuff, just for you. Just maybe somebody will try it out tomorrow and see if it works for them.
Well, I think Jen was saying, talking to friends and reaching out and just reminding yourself that we did good work, you know, and we're still capable of doing work. We have a lot to be proud of. Um, and, the solidarity with each other. I also find, focusing on others and their experience coming from such a place of privilege as I do, I find that helpful to move my focus and to never engage in the pity party, but really to motivate and support and amplify the most needy. I mean, this is the time of looking at true as intersectional parts of our movement and our community as possible. And focusing on that helps me keep things in perspective. And also remembering that we can't be creative if we're also in overwhelm. So there's this balance of, we need all of us to be creative right now, even though it feels like there's no avenues for our creativity. There are always avenues. It just can feel that everything is blocked, but it never is. So the media diet, the discernment that we need to develop to see, to kind of keep things in one place. I don't want to say in perspective, but keep them in one place so that we can have a clear channel as change makers to what is next, and be listening to ourselves and coming from a place of intuition and going towards something and not running away from something. So I might ask everybody, like, are you going towards something? Like, and what is that inspiring vision that you have? And working towards that and keeping that focus there. We are needed in this time. And I worry about us being, as Jenn said, so tired already. We're coming into this really depleted. But the next generation piece too, I was going to say, is Jenn said something so important. I have a friend who is a major LGBTQ activist for many, many years. And she's like, we're going to Europe, we're leaving. I said, how can you leave? Like, what do you mean? I would never think I would hear that from you, And she's like, let the next generation shape this. Like, we've been in the trenches for 25 years. Like, we've given our best, and part of it hasn't worked. And I hesitate to say that. I know it's heartbreaking to hear that, but it hasn't worked. So, that's not an opportunity for shame or blame or whatever. It kind of doesn't matter. It didn't work. It's good work, but it didn't work. So how can we as human beings, find other ways to advocate and create new pathways for ourselves to make a living, to find something that we're newly passionate about? We will always have this passion and advocacy as part of who we are, no matter where we land. But we may land in very different jobs. Entrepreneurs need to go get jobs right now if they can find them. They need to go back to an old skill set that they used to do that they never thought they would need to do again. So I think that level of introspection, but without the negativity and the heaviness, because that's going to hamper our ability to shape. We still have the ability to shape what's next. I'm not quite sure how, but I do know we need to pay attention. We can't check out. But it's not going to be the rah run in the streets kind of energy. I think my feeling of it needs to be like a regrounding energy, and a shoring up and a focus and a discernment and a care around boundaries so that we can protect our creative space, because that's how we're going to somehow get oxygen again in the midst of all of this.
Thank you for that. I'm going to come to Diego next. Diego, what are you doing to take care of yourself? What do you recommend? What works for you?
I really resonated with what you said, Jennifer, about creativity, because I manage a team of creatives, and it's hard to keep people motivated to be funny and poignant and impactful and come up with stuff on the fly like that when stuff like this is happening. And personally, I find myself kind of looking backwards and forwards. I think of my queer elders and what they've been through, and I have a legacy in my family. My grandfather's brother was gay, and we connected kind of later in his life, and I think of that and what he went through as a gay man in Mexico in the 50s, and my own experience. And I think of my nephew who's trans, and we've done some work with It Gets Better this year as an agency, and then their commitment to queer youth is so inspiring, and seeing young queer people and the way they're able to articulate who they are in a way that I could never have dreamed of at their age. That gives me a lot of hope. So I think like, knowing that we as a community have been through this, been through so much, and we're still fucking here, like that gives me a lot of hope, and that's a comforting thought.
Yeah, I agree. Jen, what do you have for us?
I love so much of what you just said, Diego. I feel like I can say all of that and then a little more. And for me, I have taken a social media detox, except for LinkedIn, because that's my professional space that's not toxic. But I, deleted the Facebook, the Instagram, TikTok, everything from my phone. I've logged out of everything just because I can't take any more of those inputs on. If I want to have some sense of composure and sanity, I cannot be in the weeds of everyone else's pain that I'm seeing, or in some cases, people's joy that is causing friends and family and people I love pain. And so I've just kind of stayed out of it. And to what Jen was saying is like really relying on community and having conversations and checking in with friends to be like, how are you doing today? And just kind of seeing what the general temperature is. And also, as Jen, you were saying, like just passing the torch on to someone else. Like I have done like the on the ground hands, like dirty work for a long time. And my team and I were having a conversation yesterday where we're like, wow, how is it this level of shit show right now? And yet also with knowing that it was coming, and to say, all right, this is our newfound motivation for this year to be even more profitable, so we can take that profit and actually just give money directly to the organizations who are doing the hard work, rather than me having to be in the trenches doing the work. I'd rather now move into a role of philanthropy and be able to just give money to those, especially those really small grassroots organizations that are having direct impact on who they're serving. So that kind of gives like a renewed sense of purpose for both myself and the team to be able to say, like, yeah, as an entrepreneur, you obviously want your company to be profitable and successful, but knowing that that profit and success also is fueling the movement in a different way than I've done in the past is just really it's a very different mindset, and I'm kind of excited to see where that takes us.
I'm excited to see where that takes you too. That is a very different mindset. And that's an interesting mindset to wrap this up on. I want to wrap by asking each of you where folks can get a hold of you. I imagine coming out of this, folks are going to want to talk to you. I'll stick with you, Jen Grace. Where can folks get into contact with you?
The easiest is my website, or the publishing website, which is Publish Your Purpose. Or if they want to get me directly, LinkedIn at Jen T. Grace. I'm always over there.
Fantastic. Diego, where can folks get into contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn as Diego Andrade, Orci's in my bio and everything, and I'm on Instagram as Andrade Sauce, the Andrade Sauce. My given name is Saucedo. I changed it when I got married, so I feel like I have to explain that it's not sauce; it's just part of my given name, but it just included the word sauce. So the Andrade Sauce on Instagram.
Incredible. Jennifer Brown, where can people find you?
Thank you. It's at Jennifer Brown Speaks on Instagram and Jennifer Brown on LinkedIn. And jenniferbrownspeaks.com is my website.
Fantastic. If you are looking to get into contact with Do the Work, it is Do the Work, WERQ.com, all over Instagram. We are on LinkedIn as well. If you're looking for me, LinkedIn is the way to find me. If you would like to be a part of the speaker series, we would be more than happy to host you. Folks, thank you for joining me for this conversation. Thank you for coming out and having the hard conversation during a not fun week. I applaud your energy, and I am so thankful to have been able to share this space with you. You are always welcome back. Next time we can have a more fun conversation, I promise. But again, thank you for your energy and your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.